The mining vessel Prometheus drifted dead in space, its hull scarred by plasma burns, and its crew compartments vented to the void. Emergency beacons have been silent for 3 standard days when the Star Dragon Patrol found her floating in the debris field of what had once been the human colony of New Terra. Commander Vexai of the Crimson Talon extended his massive wings as he surveyed the wreckage through the bridge viewport. His scaled hide shimmered with bioluminescent patterns of disgust. The humans had fought well, but like all their kind, they had fallen to superior firepower and tactics. The Star Dragon Empire had no patience for species that refused to submit. "Commander, we're detecting a life sign," reported Lieutenant Zarthek, his claws clicking against the sensor console. Deck 7, forward section. Vexai's golden eyes narrowed. Humans were notoriously difficult to kill completely. Some always managed to hide in the darkest corners of their ships, clinging to life like parasites. "Send a boarding team. If it's armed, eliminate it. If it's wounded, let it die slowly." The boarding party consisted of 6 Star Dragon warriors, each standing nearly 8 feet tall, with wings that spanned 12 feet when fully extended. Their natural armor could deflect small arms fire, and their talons could tear through steel plating. They had conquered 17 species in the past century alone. One surviving human posed no threat. The airlock cycled with a hiss of equalizing atmosphere. The warriors moved through the darkened corridors with fluid grace, their enhanced vision cutting through the shadows. Emergency lighting cast eerie red glows across bulkheads that had been decorated with human art and photographs. Images of families, loved ones, children playing in sunlit gardens on worlds that no longer existed. "Life sign is stronger now," whispered Sergeant Kreldos, checking his scanner. "Next compartment forward." They rounded the corner and found themselves in what had been the ship's nursery. Toys floated in the zero gravity, along with bottles, blankets, and other items that spoke of the youngest passengers who had once called this place home. In the center of the room, strapped into an emergency pod that had somehow maintained life support, was a human child. The boy couldn't have been more than 5 standard years old. His dark hair drifted around his pale face as he slept, unaware that death stalked the corridors around him. The pod's readout showed stable vitals and adequate supplies for perhaps another day. Kreldos raised his plasma rifle. Orders were to eliminate any survivors. But something made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the way the child clutched a small stuffed animal, or how peaceful he looked despite the carnage that surrounded him. The Star Dragons were warriors, conquerors, but they were not monsters. Their culture valued strength above all else, but there was no strength in killing a sleeping infant. "Commander," Kreldos activated his communicator. "We have a situation." Vexai arrived within minutes, his massive form barely fitting through the doorway. He studied the sleeping child with the same intensity he might reserve for analyzing enemy fortifications. The boy was completely helpless, utterly defenseless, and somehow still alive when everything around him had died. "Zenakben, Vethai Mumut." His parents must have used their last moments to secure his pod. They sacrificed themselves to save him. "Should we end his suffering?" asked Kreldos uncertainly. Vexai was quiet for a long moment. In their legends, the Star Dragon spoke of the Keth Mori, the orphaned young who survived against impossible odds. Such children were considered blessed by the battle gods, marked for greatness through their ability to endure when all others had fallen. "No," Vexai decided. "This one will come with us." The child stirred as they transferred him to their medical bay, his eyes opening to reveal startling blue irises. He looked around at the towering dragon-like beings surrounding him and showed no fear. If anything, he seemed curious about their bioluminescent patterns and the way their scales caught the light. "Mama," he asked in a universal human greeting for a caregiver. "Your mama is gone, little one," Vexai said gently, surprised to find himself using the human language he had learned for interrogation purposes. "You are safe now." The boy nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense to him. "Are you dragons?" "Like in the stories." "We are star dragons," Vexai confirmed. "What is your designation, young human?" "Tommy," the boy said solemnly. Tommy Chun, I'm 4 3/4 years old. And so began the most unlikely adoption in the history of the Star Dragon Empire. Tommy was taken aboard the Crimson Talon as Vexai's ward, a decision that raised eyebrows throughout the fleet, but was ultimately accepted due to the commander's exemplary service record. The Star Dragons discovered that human children were remarkably adaptable. Tommy learned their language within weeks, picking up the complex tonal variations that had taken most adult human prisoners years to master. He showed no fear of their imposing forms, instead delighting in the patterns of their scales and asking endless questions about their culture, their technology, and their way of life. More importantly, he displayed an intuitive understanding of Star Dragon military tactics that astounded his adoptive father. When Vexai reviewed battle plans in his quarters, Tommy would point to weak points in defensive formations or suggest alternative approaches that more experienced officers had missed. The blue ships should go around the back of the asteroid, Tommy said one evening, studying a holographic display of their next target. Then, when the red ships attacked the front, the blue ones can surprise them. Vexai stared at the tactical display, then ran the simulation with Tommy's suggested modifications. The predicted casualties dropped by 60%, while mission success probability increased dramatically. How did you see that? Vexai asked in amazement. Tommy shrugged with the casual confidence of a child. It's like a game. The pieces need to work together. As months passed, Tommy grew from a curious toddler into a sharp-minded boy who could hold his own in conversations with Star Dragon military officers. He absorbed their combat philosophies, their honor codes, and their strategic thinking with the ease of a native speaker learning a second language. But Tommy also retained something uniquely human, an ability to think outside established patterns, to see solutions that escaped even the most brilliant Star Dragon minds. Where they saw honor in direct confrontation, he saw opportunity in misdirection. Where they valued individual prowess, he understood the power of coordinated teamwork. The breakthrough came during the siege of Corval Prime. The fortress world had held out against Star Dragon forces for 8 months, its defensive systems proving nearly impregnable. The Imperial fleet had suffered heavy losses in 3 direct assaults, and morale was beginning to waver. Tommy, now 7 years old and granted the honorary rank of battle advisor, studied the intelligence reports with the same intensity he had once reserved for picture books. Father, he said to Vexai, what if we don't try to break their shields? The shields are what make them invulnerable, young one. We must find a way through them, or this siege will continue indefinitely. But what if we make them want to lower the shields themselves? Vexai's crest rose with interest. Explain. Tommy pointed to the sensor readings. They're worried about their food supplies. That's why they keep sending supply runs to the outer settlements. If we capture one of their supply ships and fill it with something they really need, they might let it through the shields. And then we spring our trap from within, Vexai finished, his eyes blazing with predatory satisfaction. Brilliant. But what could we offer them that they would risk their security for? Tommy's smile was innocent and devastating. Medicine for their children. Humans always protect their young first. The plan worked flawlessly. A captured supply vessel was loaded with genuine medical supplies for treating a plague that had broken out in the fortress city's pediatric wards. When it requested emergency docking clearance, the desperate defenders lowered a section of their shields just long enough for the ship to pass through. What they didn't know was that the cargo hold also contained 50 Star Dragon commandos in stealth armor, along with a compact but devastatingly effective EMP device that would disable the shield generators from within. Corval Prime fell within 6 hours. The human colonial authority lost their last major stronghold in the sector, and Tommy Chun, the human child who had orchestrated their defeat, became a legend throughout the Star Dragon fleet. But even legends must face the consequences of their actions. As Tommy watched the surrender ceremony from Vexai's side, he saw the human prisoners being led away in chains. Men and women who looked like the parents he barely remembered, children who might have been his playmates in another life. "Father," he said quietly, "did we do the right thing?" Vexai placed a massive, clawed hand on Tommy's shoulder. "You asked the questions of a philosopher, young one. In war, there's only victory and defeat. We chose victory. But at what cost?" "That," Vexai said grimly, "is a question you will spend the rest of your life answering." As the Imperial fleet departed Corval Prime with their prize, Tommy stood at the observation deck watching the conquered world shrink in the distance. He was no longer just a human child who had been saved by dragon warriors. He was something new, something unprecedented, a hybrid of two cultures, carrying the tactical genius of his species and the honor code of his adopters. The galaxy would soon learn to fear the name Tommy Chun, though none yet suspected that this 7-year-old boy would one day reshape the very foundations of the Star Dragon Empire. His greatest victories lay ahead, but so did his greatest challenges. The path from rescued orphan to emperor was paved with difficult choices, and Tommy was only just beginning to understand the weight of the crown that destiny was weaving for him. In the depths of space, other human colonies received emergency transmissions about the fall of Corval Prime. They spoke in whispered tones of the Star Dragon fleet's new secret weapon. A human child who fought like a dragon, thought like a human, and won battles that should have been impossible. Some called him a traitor to his species. Others whispered that he might be humanity's last hope for survival in a galaxy dominated by dragon fire and Talon. Tommy Chin himself was still too young to understand either accusation, focused instead on the tactical displays that had become his favorite toys and the adoptive father who had saved him from a void. But the seeds of empire were already taking root in his young mind, and the Star Dragons who had raised him were about to discover that they had nurtured something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. A human who understood their strengths and weaknesses better than they understood themselves. The Star Dragon Military Academy on Thexcora Prime had never seen anything like Tommy Chun. At 12 years old, he was the youngest cadet in the institution's 700-year history, and certainly the only human to walk its hallowed corridors. His presence sparked heated debates among the faculty and outright hostility from many of his fellow students. "Look, it's the dragon's pet," sneered Cakestar, a young star dragon whose bloodline traced back to the first conquest wars. His crimson scales bristled with aggressive postures as he blocked Tommy's path to the combat simulation chamber. "Tell me, human, do you fetch and roll over on command?" Tommy looked up at the towering figure with calm, measuring eyes that had learned to read the subtle displays of Star Dragon body language better than most natives. Cakestar's wing positions indicated uncertainty masquerading as confidence. His tail movements showed he was testing for weakness rather than genuinely seeking conflict. "I could demonstrate," Tommy replied mildly, "but I need you to assume the position first so I could show everyone the proper technique." The watching crowd of cadets fell silent. In Star Dragon culture, such a response would typically trigger an immediate challenge duel. But Cakestar hesitated because beating a human half his size would bring no honor, while losing to one would bring eternal shame. "Enough," commanded Instructor Velthorn, her massive presence radiating the authority of a veteran who had personally led the conquest of 6 worlds. "Cadet Shun, you're late for tactical analysis. Cadet Cakestar, you're early for disciplinary review." Tommy bowed respectfully to both his instructor and his antagonist before making his way to the simulation chamber. He had learned that showing proper respect defused most confrontations before they could escalate. The Star Dragons valued honor above all else, and treating their customs with genuine reverence had earned him grudging acceptance from all but the most prejudiced. The tactical simulation waiting for him was brutal. The Battle of Zirian Gate, where a human fleet had held off Star Dragon forces for 3 days before finally being overwhelmed. It was a favorite test scenario because no cadet had ever managed to achieve victory playing as the human side. The simulation was designed to teach humility and the futility of resisting superior Star Dragon strategy. Tommy reviewed the initial conditions, 27 human ships versus a Star Dragon battle group of 43 vessels. The humans held a defensive position around a civilian evacuation route, while the Star Dragons could attack from multiple vectors with superior technology and firepower. According to the historical records, the human force had been completely annihilated with minimal Star Dragon casualties. But Tommy had spent years studying not just Star Dragon tactics, but human ones as well. In his private quarters, he had access to captured human military databases that Vexhai had provided for his education. He understood how humans thought, how they adapted, how they turned disadvantages into advantages through sheer stubborn creativity. The simulation began with the Star Dragon commander, played by the Academy's tactical computer, launching a probing attack against the human defensive perimeter. Tommy responded not with the desperate counterattack that history recorded, but with a fighting withdrawal that drew the Star Dragon forces deeper into the asteroid field surrounding Zirian Gate. "Interesting," murmured Instructor Velthorn as she watched Tommy's unconventional approach. "He's not following the historical battle plan." Other cadets gathered around the observation screens, curious to see how the human would inevitably fail. But as the simulation progressed, something unprecedented began to happen. Tommy was winning. His human fleet used guerrilla tactics that the Star Dragon computer couldn't anticipate. Ships would appear from behind asteroids, launch devastating surprise attacks, then vanish back into the rocky maze before the superior Star Dragon weapons could target them effectively. More importantly, Tommy was using the Star Dragon force's own aggressive instincts against them. "He's baiting them," realized Cadet Morthek with grudging admiration. "Every time they charge in for the kill, he leads them into another ambush." The simulated Star Dragon commander, following programmed tactical doctrines, grew increasingly frustrated as his numerical advantage was slowly whittled away. Ship after ship fell to precisely coordinated human attacks that struck from unexpected angles and retreated before retaliation was possible. When the simulation finally ended, the impossible had occurred. The human fleet had not only survived, but had actually driven off the Star Dragon attackers with acceptable losses. The viewing chamber erupted in shocked silence. "How?" demanded Cakestar, his earlier antagonism replaced by genuine bewilderment. "The scenario is impossible. Every tactical analysis proves human forces cannot defeat superior Star Dragon fleets." Tommy shut down his command console and turned to face his classmates. "The analysis assumes that humans fight like Star Dragons. But we don't. You value honor in direct combat, individual prowess, demonstrating superiority through strength. Humans value survival, adaptation, winning by any means necessary." Instructor Velthorn stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Cadet Shun, you've just demonstrated tactics that could be considered treacherous by Star Dragon standards. Striking from ambush, retreating from confrontation, using deception instead of honest battle." "Yes, Instructor," Tommy acknowledged calmly. "But I achieved victory with minimal casualties to my own forces while inflicting maximum damage on the enemy. Isn't that the ultimate goal of any military engagement?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Star Dragon military held sacred. Their culture had been built on honor through strength, personal combat prowess, and direct confrontation. The idea that victory could be achieved through what they considered cowardly tactics was almost incomprehensible. But the simulation results were undeniable. Tommy had accomplished what centuries of Star Dragon tactical doctrine claimed was impossible. Word of the impossible simulation victory spread throughout the Academy within hours. By evening, it had reached the Imperial High Command on the capital world of Draconum. By the following morning, orders arrived for Tommy to be transferred to advanced strategic planning courses typically reserved for senior officers. His new instructor was General Thackeron, a legendary figure who had personally conquered 12 worlds and served as tactical advisor to the Emperor himself. The old warrior's scales bore the scars of countless battles, and his presence commanded instant respect from anyone who understood military hierarchy. "Human, General Thakron began without preamble. "You have caused quite a disturbance among the High Command. Some call you a prodigy. Others whisper that you're a security risk, too dangerous to be trusted with our military secrets." Tommy stood at attention, having learned to present himself with the formal discipline that Star Dragons expected. "I serve the Empire, General. My loyalty is to the throne and to the father who saved my life." "Yes, Commander Vexhai speaks highly of you. But loyalty is easy to claim and difficult to prove." The general activated a holographic display showing a star chart of the contested border regions. "We face a new threat. The Terran Resistance has organized a coordinated rebellion across 7 systems. They've studied our tactics, adapted to our strategies, and are using guerrilla warfare to make our occupation forces' lives miserable." Tommy studied the tactical display with growing interest. The human resistance was operating exactly as he would have expected, avoiding direct confrontation, striking supply lines, using mobility and local knowledge to offset the Star Dragon's technological advantages. "They're fighting smart," Tommy observed, "using our own success against us. The more systems we try to control, the thinner our forces become. They're forcing us to garrison every important facility, which leaves us vulnerable to concentrated attacks." "Precisely. And our field commanders are struggling to adapt. They think like Star Dragons, not like humans. We need someone who understands both ways of thinking." Tommy felt a chill of understanding. "You want me to help plan the suppression of human resistance forces?" "I want you to help save lives on both sides," General Thakron corrected firmly. "This rebellion cannot succeed. The Empire's military superiority is overwhelming. But if it drags on, millions will die unnecessarily, Star Dragon and human alike. You could help us end this conflict quickly and cleanly." The weight of the decision pressed down on Tommy like a gravitational field. He was being asked to use his human intuition and Star Dragon training to fight against his own species. Yet he could also see the truth in the general's words. The rebellion was doomed to fail, and prolonging it would only increase the suffering. "What would you require of me?" Tommy asked carefully. "Analysis, prediction, understanding of how human commanders think and how they'll react to our tactical adjustments. You won't be targeting civilians or planning atrocities. This is about ending a war efficiently." Tommy spent 3 sleepless nights considering the proposal. In his private moments, he spoke with Vexhai through secure communications, seeking guidance from the Star Dragon, who had become more than a father to him. "The choice is yours, young one," Vexhai told him. "But remember that sometimes the greatest kindness is swift victory rather than prolonged suffering. You have the power to save lives. How you use that power will define who you become." When Tommy returned to General Thakron with his answer, he carried himself with a new maturity that hadn't been there before. The easy confidence of youth had been replaced by something harder and more complex. "I'll help," he said simply, "but I want to be involved in the post-conflict planning as well. If we're going to defeat these resistant cells, we need to ensure that the conditions that created them don't arise again." General Thakron's eyes glittered with satisfaction. "You're thinking like a true strategic mind now. Very well. Welcome to the Inner Circle, Cadet Chun. Your real education is about to begin." And so Tommy Chun took his first steps down the path that would eventually lead him to the Imperial throne. But he did so with the full weight of understanding what he was becoming, a bridge between 2 species, carrying the hopes and fears of both. The resistance fighters he was about to help defeat were his own people, but the empire he served had given him purpose, family, and the tools to reshape the galaxy. The teenage years that followed would test every aspect of his identity as Tommy learned to balance his human heart with his dragon mind, all while the seeds of imperial ambition took root in soil watered by impossible choices and necessary compromises. The Imperial Palace on Draconum had never witnessed a scene like the one unfolding in its grand throne room. Tommy Chun, now 25 years old and bearing the rank of Supreme Admiral, knelt before Emperor Zarkalos as thousands of Star Dragon nobles watched in stunned silence. The human who had once been a helpless child was about to be named heir to the most powerful empire in the galaxy. "Rise, Tommy Chun," commanded the ancient emperor, his voice resonating through the vast chamber. Zarkalos was over 3 centuries old, his golden scales dimmed by age, but his presence still commanding absolute authority. "You have served this empire with distinction beyond any measure we have known." Tommy rose smoothly, his movements carrying the fluid grace that came from a lifetime among star dragons. He wore ceremonial armor crafted specifically for his human frame, its design incorporating both star dragon aesthetic and human functionality. The assembled nobility regarded him with expressions ranging from grudging respect to barely concealed hostility. "In 40 years of rule," Emperor Zarkalos continued, "I have conquered 17 species and expanded our borders across 200 systems. But I have never seen strategic brilliance to match what you displayed in the Terran pacification campaign." The campaign Tommy had helped design had ended the human rebellion in 6 months rather than the projected 6 years. His understanding of human psychology and Star Dragon capabilities had created a strategy so effective that most resistance cells had surrendered without firing a shot. More importantly, his post-conflict reconstruction plans had turned former rebels into productive citizens of the Empire. But Tommy knew the real reason he stood here today had nothing to do with military victories. The Emperor was dying, his ancient biology finally succumbing to the accumulated damage of 3 centuries of warfare. His own sons had fallen in battle decades ago, leaving no direct heir to the throne. The succession crisis that should have followed could have torn the empire apart. Instead, Zarkalos had made the unprecedented decision to adopt Tommy as his heir, not just as a favored protege, but as a true son in the eyes of Star Dragon law. The legal challenges alone had taken 2 years to resolve, requiring amendments to imperial succession codes that hadn't been changed in 500 years. "There are those," the emperor continued, his gaze sweeping across the assembled nobles, "who question my decision to name a human as my successor. They whisper that it violates our ancient traditions, that it diminishes the honor of our bloodlines." A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably, knowing their private conversations had somehow reached imperial ears. "Let me address those concerns directly," Zarkalos said, his voice taking on the steel that had conquered half the galaxy. "Tradition serves us only so long as it makes us strong. When tradition becomes a chain that binds us to weakness, it must be broken." Tommy remained motionless, but his enhanced hearing caught the subtle sound around him. The whispered conversations, the rustle of wings as nobles exchanged significant glances, the faint hiss of someone drawing breath to voice an objection. "Admiral Chun," the Emperor commanded, "tell our court how you would address the Kethvari rebellion in the Outer Rim." The question was both a test and a demonstration. The Kethvari uprising had been raging for 8 months, tying down 3 full battle fleets and costing the Empire enormous resources. Traditional Star Dragon tactics had proven ineffective against the insectoid species' hive mind coordination and underground tunnel networks. Tommy stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "The Kethvari fight as one organism, Your Majesty. Our current strategy treats them as individual combatants, which plays directly into their strengths. We need to think of their entire civilization as a single target." He gestured toward the holographic display that materialized above the throne. "Rather than attacking their military forces directly, we target their reproductive queens. The Kethvari worker classes won't fight to protect territory or resources, but they'll sacrifice everything to defend their breeding centers." The display showed Tommy's proposed strategy: precise strikes against specific biological targets that would force the entire Kethvari population to concentrate their defenses in predictable locations. Once massed, they could be defeated with conventional tactics. Furthermore, Tommy continued. We offer the surviving queens protected status within the Empire in exchange for their worker service in our mining operations. The Kethvari excel at tunnel construction and resource extraction. What we frame as defeat, they'll eventually see as symbiosis. The throne room fell silent as the implications sank in. Tommy wasn't just proposing military victory. He was outlining a strategy that would turn a costly rebellion into an economic asset for the Empire. Duke Vorth K, one of the Emperor's most trusted advisors, spoke carefully. Admiral Chun, your strategy shows remarkable insight, but it also demonstrates thinking patterns that are uniquely human. How can we be certain that such alien perspectives will serve Star Dragon interests? Tommy had been expecting this challenge. It was the core of every objection to his succession. He was not truly one of them. Your Grace raises the essential question, Tommy replied respectfully. But consider this. Every species we've conquered has brought something valuable to the Empire. The Zilani provide our best engineers. The Morvax serve as our agricultural specialists. The humans who have joined us excel at adaptive strategy and resource optimization. He paused, letting his words carry weight before continuing. I don't think like a Star Dragon because I'm not one, but I think for the Star Dragon Empire because it's the only home I've ever known. My alien perspective isn't a weakness to be overcome. It's a strategic advantage to be employed. Emperor Tsar Kalos smiled, a fearsome expression that revealed rows of predatory teeth. Well spoken, and it brings me to the true reason for this ceremony. The ancient ruler rose from his throne, his massive form still imposing despite his age. The galaxy is changing. Our traditional enemies have learned to counter our traditional tactics. The species we've conquered are adapting, evolving, finding new ways to resist or rebel. We need leaders who can think beyond the limitations of our own culture. Tommy felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders as the Emperor approached him. Tommy Chun, you are the bridge between what we were and what we must become. You understand our strength while seeing our blind spots. You can lead us into an era where the Star Dragon Empire doesn't just conquer through force, but rules through wisdom. The succession ceremony that followed was both solemn and spectacular. Tommy swore the ancient oaths in perfect Hydraconic, his voice carrying the formal tones that he'd practiced for months. When the crown of stars was placed upon his head, he became the first non-star dragon in history to hold the title of imperial heir. But the real test began after the ceremony ended. In the weeks that followed, Tommy faced a dozen attempted coups, 3 assassination attempts, and countless political challenges from nobles who refused to accept human leadership. Each threat was met with responses that demonstrated why the dying emperor had chosen so wisely. When Duke Kadar led a military rebellion in the Third Fleet, Tommy didn't order his forces destroyed. Instead, he challenged Kadar to single combat, something no human should have been able to survive. The duel lasted 3 hours and ended with the Duke yielding not to superior strength, but to superior strategy and unbreakable will. When a merchant guild attempted to manipulate trade routes to economically isolate systems loyal to Tommy, he responded by creating alternative supply chains that were more efficient than the original networks. The guild found themselves begging to be allowed back into the very markets they had tried to control. Most importantly, when human resistance cells learned that one of their own species now stood to inherit the Star Dragon throne, Tommy met with their leaders personally. The conversations were held in secret, lasting for days, as he worked to convince them that his rule could mean something unprecedented, a galactic empire that served all its citizens rather than just its conquerors. The transformation wasn't immediate or universal, but gradually, the empire began to change under Tommy's influence. Conquered species found themselves with representation in imperial councils. Trade policies shifted to benefit all worlds rather than just the Star Dragon homeworlds. Military strategies emphasized integration over domination. When Emperor Tsar Kalos finally passed away in his sleep, the succession proceeded smoothly despite decades of concerns about stability. Tommy Chun became Emperor Tormak, taking a star dragon name that meant bridge builder in the ancient tongue. His coronation speech was delivered in 17 different languages to represent every species within imperial borders. The words he spoke that day would be remembered for centuries. An empire built on strength alone will eventually meet something stronger. But an empire built on wisdom, adaptation, and mutual prosperity can last forever. The human child who had been found floating in the wreckage of his home world had grown into something the galaxy had never seen. Ruler who understood that true power came not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to transform. Under his reign, the Star Dragon Empire evolved from a predatory force into something approaching a true interstellar civilization. Tommy often stood in his private chambers late at night, looking out at the stars and remembering the parents he had never really known. He wondered what they would think of the man their son had become. Would they be proud that he had survived and thrived? Would they be horrified that he had helped their conquerors become more effective rulers? In the end, Tommy decided it didn't matter what they might have thought. The choices he had made were his own, guided by the moral framework that both species had given him. He was human enough to value innovation and adaptation, Star Dragon enough to understand honor and duty. The boy who had been saved from a void had grown into the bridge between two civilizations. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges that no single species could face alone. But with a human mind guiding Star Dragon strength, perhaps they could build something worthy of the stars themselves. Emperor Tormak ruled for 63 years, transforming the known galaxy through policies that balanced conquest with cooperation, strength with wisdom. When he finally passed away peacefully in his sleep, the empire he left behind was larger, more prosperous, and more stable than any civilization in recorded history. The last human child had become the greatest Star Dragon Emperor of all time, proving that sometimes the most profound revolutions begin with a simple act of compassion toward a helpless orphan floating alone in the dark between stars.